What's going on, guys, and welcome back. If you're new, then welcome. Thank you guys for tuning in. If you guys have been watching for a while, you know I've been really trying to get back on videos. But as a one-man shop and one-man film crew, it's super hard to film while you're working, especially when you get into some of the more tedious work, like we're about to get into in this video. The last probably close to 2 weeks, I've been really working on the center console in Andrew's car. So that's what we're gonna go over in this video today. I was super bad about filming the whole process of this center console, but I'm gonna try to kind of talk you guys through it and explain what I did, and then there'll be some random video of me working throughout the talk. So after the last better part of 2 weeks, I've been working on this center console. This is like 90% of the way done. I'm gonna end up enclosing back here a little bit, and it'll tie into the face right here. And then this will end up getting trimmed out a lot more because plumbing lines and everything, electrical has to run through there. And then probably about the height that I tie the center console piece right here into the face, it'll be all open underneath that, but I left this face long until we get to that point, because this whole piece needs to be able to be removable. And that's kind of the reason why I did it the way I did it, because once these cutting brakes are in place right here and all the plumbing is done, we need to be able to remove this center console with those still being in place. I don't want to have to undo lines and everything just to get the center console off. And then serviceability of whatever is behind the console obviously needs to be able to easily get access to. So let's kind of disassemble the center console, and I'll show you guys kind of the process of how we got to this point. One thing I did want to add about this before I do take it apart and get into explaining some of this stuff, the overall profile and layout of how I did the console is all behind the goal of having visibility to that right front tire. So having the console come out any further than pretty much this point right here would be in the sight line of, as you're sitting in this driver's seat, I'm trying to get the camera as close to my sight line as possible. But sitting in the seat without having to like lean over a ton or anything, this point is straight out towards where that tire is. So I didn't want to extend this point any further over, blocking that visibility range. So that's really the reason why we ended up poking the intake out past the face of the side panel, just to keep that sight line out towards that front tire open. And then in the end, I honestly think it ended up looking pretty cool with the cutout the way we did it. So that's really the reason for the profile of that side. And then this side is blocked off so that the orbital sits on its side, so the lines poke out to the right side, and then they will be blocked behind the center console. That way you don't see the exposed lines or anything. So that was really the main reason behind the layout that we did. So with that being said, let's get these panels off and we'll dig into how we constructed it. So with the side panels removed, you can start to see how much access to whatever's behind here you're gonna actually have. It really opens it up a lot, just having the console be the face right here, and then this whole side comes off. The computer will be back here, the Switch Pro will be back here, and really getting this panel off will open it up to going through all those components, as well as the plumbing coming off of this side. That panel ends right about here, so the lines will be all open right there. And then walking around to the other side, and then on this side you can see same thing, wide open, access to the intake, transcooler lines. Having that whole side, having both sides come off also allows for, once we do take this whole main front cover piece off, it's able to come out of the car because we have the debris bars that come back at an angle here, as well as once it's shortened on the front side, cutting brakes are going to be in the way and everything. So we need to be able to get this console in and out of the car relatively easy whenever we do have to do service and maintenance on this car. So this main front cover piece is held in with 3 Zeus buttons on the top side, as well as 1 on this side and 1 on this side. So we'll pull this off and kind of work our way forward from there. So trying to kind of go back and start from the beginning, every console I've done up to this point has had some kind of tubing structure that is the actual like skeleton of the center console. This car, since it's such tight packaging and there's not much room to work with, and the intake is flipped backwards, cutting brakes and everything, packaging is super limited back here. So what I ended up doing is the debris bars will always come down and connect down into the chassis somewhere, but that's not really a spot to connect the center console to. It's more or less just a spot that if you roll over and the debris bars crush in, they're connected to something. Obviously this is just 1-inch tubing because we're limited on space, but it does have some support under here, and that's always the main goal with those bars that come down from the debris bars. So this center console, I don't know what the proper term is, but I call it a frameless center console, as opposed to like this car over here. This is a goat built chassis, and they have tubing that comes down from the debris bars, the dash bar, down into the seat tube. Same thing with these engine, backside of the engine, whatever you want to call them, tubes that come down into the frame rails. That ends up being the structure of where your panels are going to attach to, and then you can end up having just a face here and 2 sides, and relatively simple as far as the structure of the center console goes. For this one, that's not really the case. My goal with this car was to leave everything as wide open as possible, since you do have such tight packaging on these cars. As much room as you can get when you start taking panels off just makes it that much easier to work on. So obviously the first thing that I always start with when doing a center console is the floors. The floors you kind of saw before in the last video. I always just build the floor panels long, and then we'll end up trimming back what we don't need. This is still just a rough edge right here, because this will end up getting trimmed back whenever we do close in this portion right here, the center into the console. We'll probably end up doing something with this area, boxing in the pivot points, whatever. I would always rather have more material than not enough, because it's always easier to cut material off than to add material when you cut too much. So what I did with this console is the easiest way to start a frameless center console is to kind of get your front profile of the console figured out. And I would have liked to have been able to do this top part and the bottom part all in one piece, but drawing it out, it's easiest to kind of digest it in smaller chunks. And the easiest way for me to draw that in the computer was to do the top profile up here. It's just a super slight bend right here because the dash bar it's high in the center and then it breaks down just a little bit on the side. So there is a slight bend, but basically got the profile of the top that I wanted and then bent this front face down to this point. And once I had that in the car, then I was able to pull a measurement from that, how far out and down I wanted to go, and then down to the floor. So I'll roughly put this back in here. I was able to do this front face and then add on from that point down to the floor. I did end up cutting out one that was kind of a mock-up top piece and then pull a little bit more accurate measurements off of this point down to the floor than I would have been able to with like a cardboard template. So the top part with the top and the face was the only part I did in the computer. The rest of it was all cardboard templates and just hand cutting out. So when looking at these center consoles, the easiest way to tell the story of how it was constructed is to look at the back side, because the front side all is nice ground down seams that you can't really tell what was added when. But we'll take a look at the back side and see what we're working with. So like I said, I did the top surface, this front face, and then I ended up breaking this edge to give me that top main profile that I was going for with our 4 gauge cutouts in the front. And then once I got that in the car where I wanted it, it wasn't gonna move. I then added this bottom face down here. Which gave our overall structure of the front of this console. Then from there, I added both of these 2 edge flanges, which took a bit of planning. I'm still fairly new to doing this like frameless center console, because normally if I had a tube here going down from the dash bar to the seat tube or something, I could just attach this panel to that tube. But without having that tube, this has to have some kind of a hard edge on it. So by welding these edge flanges on right here, that gave us our rigid structure. So then when I added this edge flange, it took a bit of planning, in my opinion. I'm still new to doing this style of center console, and doing these step rolls and everything so that the panel sits flush. So there was a little bit of a learning curve on doing this, but I had to try to plan this out the best that I could, and you learn with everyone. They get better and better as you go. But the original plan was to do this whole access panel right here. And kind of the hard part about doing this is you really have to plan where your panel's gonna lay and bead roll it all before you weld it on, because if you weld it on and then you need to bead roll in a certain area or something, you usually can't easily stick this back in the bead roller, because this face will end up contacting some part of the bead roller and be in the way. So I had to plan out and sketch this this contour on this little strip before it was welded on the panel. So what I did was get a little cardboard template. So once I got this front face on here, the next step was getting this flange on the floor, which was going to be a place to mount the side panel. And we kind of had to just do the best we could with the space, because we're going to end up having headers that are going to be really tight to the inside of this panel, but obviously we'll want to do a panel in between here so that our foot isn't getting burned by the exhaust. So it's been my plan all along to grind down this seam where this edge flange connects to the floor, but if anybody's ever blended an inside corner like this, it's kind of a pain to get perfect and it takes a lot of time. So I may end up just leaving the weld seam, and once it's powder coated, won't really be able to tell that much anyway. So we welded this flange on here and had to plan out where the bead roll was going to connect to the upper panel. And at the time I thought this layout was going to look cool, but once it's all said and done, hindsight's 2020, I don't know really why I did this cutout right here. I should have just continued the bead roll all the way to the front and then kind of came up from there. But I knew I wanted to have some step roll all the way around here that encompassed this whole area, and then another step roll up here. So that's why I ended up step rolling this front part for a little tab on that panel to land. And then up here, this corner wasn't a part of the original front face. I ended up patching in this section right here after, just because it was easier to do this as one break at this point and then a second break here, rather than having to break this corner and then weld this seam. It was easier just to patch in this whole corner, which ended up needing a kind of a lofted bend across here to get it to kind of match up to the corner of the orbital mount. And then just did a slight edge roll on the side right here, or on the bottom, just to kind of give it some style and not just like a sharp edge protruding straight down. So did just a simple bead roll on the top just to give it some style points, and then a slight tank roll on the edges right here just to kind of flow into the dash tube. This side was a little bit more tricky to do this edge flange, just because we had multiple different profiles that we were trying to follow. This face, and then this, to get it to lay on here how we wanted. Obviously, when we did this tube, we had to be mindful of clearing the intake, clearing the headers and everything back here. So that's why it has this bend back in it, just to clear all of those components, as well as still have that sight line from the driver's seat. And then same thing as the other side, just edge flange welded to the floor, and then we cut the back side of the floor out where it was excess material we didn't need. And then just did one Zeus tab in the corner of this flange to hold this whole front face on. So between the 3 in the top and the 1 on each side of the bottom, this whole center console is very strong and secure in here. It's not a flimsy unit in here, not having that tubing structure. So then from there, cardboard layouts are your friend. Like I said, I don't like how I did this profile, but I didn't really know that until I got a good majority of the way into this panel and had a lot of time into it. So for this one, it's what we're sticking with. So looking at this panel back on here, this is kind of what I'm talking about. I don't really know why I did this layout the way I did it. I originally thought it would look kind of cool to have this stepped rolled edge come up and then just butt up to this bottom flange, but since it's not absolutely perfect fitment, this edge just ends up looking kind of weird. So I would have probably rather just do this whole edge around here and then kind of come up and then maybe butt up here, or just continue out the front up here. But I think kind of my reason for ending this step roll section here and not having it go past this point is that tube is behind this panel. So if it's step rolled back right here and it's into that tube, it'll just push the panel out a little bit more. Probably wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but that was kind of my original thought process behind the layout that I did. But like I said, with every car that you build, you kind of learn things, that little different tricks, and just thinking it out a little more in general, I guess. And then another thing that I really wish I would have figured out as I was doing these whole step rolls on this part in the beginning is I have an 1/8 inch step roll die, which my bead roller doesn't have the adjustable depth spacing between the upper and lower die. And what I figured out is with an 1/8 inch step roll, if you space those dies out more, you get kind of a gradual longer step, which ends up looking a lot better if I would have done it on this whole part and then would have been a deeper step. So in the next one, I'm definitely going to do that. This is a tank roll in here, but basically if you put a washer behind the upper die, it just spaces it out a little bit and gives a deeper step. And then this side, so this side was actually the first side that I did, and then I ended up doing that side second, which was kind of weird because usually I'll do the easier side first and then attack the harder side, but in this case I wanted to do the hard side first and then go to the easy side. So like I said, with this edge profile around here, this panel had a lot of compound bends and different planes that we were working with. So this panel is actually one piece on this part, and then this was a separate piece that I ended up adding. And then actually, in all truthfulness, this is actually 1, 2, 3 pieces because I ended up messing up this whole edge right here. How I did the bottom edge meeting up to this bottom flange, I didn't do the panel long enough, and so there was a weird gap and it wasn't an equal reveal all the way across the bottom flange and the panel, and then the tab didn't quite sit right in this bottom cutout. So I ended up just adding a super small strip all the way along the bottom right here, and then redid the profile of this bottom cutout just to get it to kind of overlap this bottom flange a little bit. Like I said, I really don't like the way that I did this, but we're talking about what I did, and maybe if you guys are doing a similar console, what to do different. So just the way that it ended up working out. the profile of from this point to where that tube is behind here, there needed to be a slight bend across here to get it to lay flat on where that tube was. And then obviously from this point to where that tube is, and then from this point up to follow the contour of this. So that's why there's those multiple breaks, to get it as far back from the sight line from the driver's seat as possible, while still having somewhat of a cool style around the cutout around the intake. And I ended up it was kind of tricky to do these inside contours, but I tank rolled the inside edge all around here. It's not perfect in the corners, but it, like I said, with the other filler plate, it kind of just looks a little better having this rolled in slightly than just being a straight edge that's kind of a sharp edge. I think it looks a little better just being rolled in. And then hindsight, like I said, did this panel first and then the panel on the other side, and the panel on the other side has a bead roll in this portion and a bead roll up here. This side is a lot closer to where the exhaust is going to come out, but we don't have pedals and everything, so I tucked this panel as far back as I could, and then the exhaust is going to come. We're going to build custom headers for this car anyway, so this is going to come off right here and 90 forward, collecting more in this area up here. So it's going to clear this panel, so I just did the cutout right here just to clear that 90. And then if we do need to trim this panel back anymore, which I don't think we will, we can trim this panel and not interfere with where that bead roll would have been. So that's the reason why I didn't do any kind of bead roll style up here. It's pretty easy to nitpick where I wish I would have done things different, but all in all, I think it turned out pretty good. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out for it being my first, I'd say, fancy style center console. I've done a lot of other center consoles that are like this one, that are just panels on the chassis, tubes, and really anybody can kind of do that. So that was a bit of a long-winded explanation for me. I'm not the best at explaining things, so I hope you guys were able to bear through that and got something out of it. Like I said, I am not an expert on doing panel work. I'm not really an expert on doing any of this kind of stuff. My goal is just to kind of share what I'm doing and if anything, what not to do. Hopefully some of what to do, but kind of just help you guys if you guys are doing this on your own. Maybe look at something that I did and decide, hey, I would do that this way or whatever. And feel free to let me know in the comments something that you guys did, or shoot me a message and send me pictures of what you did. I like to see what other people are doing. I'm constantly on Instagram looking at different ways of doing things, so we're all here to learn, and the day that you stop learning is the day that you stop growing, or whatever you want to say. So that was a huge portion of the car to get knocked out. It's not really a whole lot of components getting mounted, but a console, in my opinion, of this complexity is a big part of the car to get knocked out, because now we have somewhere to house a lot of the electrical components and plumbing, hide it behind that and everything. So with that being done, we're going to work into mounting switches and gauges and battery cutoff and everything in the center console, and then keep working our way through this car. And then last thing I will kind of explain, actually let me grab this really quick, because it kind of has to do with the center console a little bit. Like I've said before, packaging on this car is super, super tight. We have moving pedals in this car. It's on a slider setup. So right now the pedals are pretty far forward, so my knee's up a lot, but they do move forward. So with the cutting brakes in here on this mount, right in this area, I originally had the rear steer valve just kind of mocked up to the back of the block just to kind of hold it in place. And I was planning on putting this facing forward into the console and then having the rear steer valve screwed into this end point right here just to hide the plumbing behind the dash. But with the intake and everything, it's really not ideal in that spot. So really the goal behind a rear steer control is to have it in a super comfortable position, which with these seats having kind of a big bolster on the side, it really just naturally is a good spot to rest your arm. And so my thought is I want to have the rear steer joystick right in this area right here. Once our shifter is back, most of the time going to be down in first gear, your arm's going to be rested right about here, and then cutting brakes right in this area. So I really think right here is the best spot for the rear steer valve, which leads into major complications in packaging, because I really don't want to put this valve right here where all the lines and everything are going to be just hanging out exposed. So my thought is we'll take this off, unscrew this. So my plan is to put the valve back here in between these seats. And the challenge with that, get it back up here, is that will make plumbing way easier. But the way that this mechanism works right here is it's a front, with this screwed in here, it's hard to hold the camera and explain this at the same time, but this is a front to back throw on this valve. So what we're gonna have to do is, with this being back here, I'm gonna do a linkage, kind of a rod end pivot on this point that's gonna go forward to up here, and then have kind of an L-shaped link that will change the direction of forward back input back here into left and right input up here, which will then have a linkage that'll go underneath this mount into the pivot down here that will be on our joystick lever up here. So if that all works out, that's going to be my plan for the linkage system to get from the stick lever back to where this is going to be mounted behind the seats. Because obviously we have a line coming off from here going up to the pump, and then a line coming off of right here going up to the orbital, and then these two lines going back to the rear steer ram. So that's kind of my plan that you'll see in the next video. I'm going to start working on that right now. I will try to do my best of film and work at the same time, but sometimes when it's complicated stuff like this, it's easier to just explain after the fact. And hopefully you guys are able to bear through my somewhat terrible explanations of things. But with all that being said, hopefully you guys made it through this whole video. Really appreciate you guys watching. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see, and let me know if you like what I'm putting out. If you don't like what I'm putting out, just let me know. Any feedback I can get is appreciated. And yeah, that's all I got. Thank you guys for watching. Keep it classy, and I'll see you guys next time.